Despite the fan-made sounding names of Resident Evil Genesis and Uprising, these games are official Capcom published retellings of Resident Evil 1 and 2. There isn't a whole lot of information about their development, but the general outline is that in 2006 Capcom acquired a mobile game company called Cosmic Infinity, who at the time were best known for holding the rights to famous licenses like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Shortly afterwards they were renamed Capcom Interactive Canada and went on to develop both titles exclusively for mobile phones in the late 2000s. This was at a time when flip phones were still pretty normal for people to have, and the vast majority of these mobile games were less than 1 megabyte in size. What's interesting about these Resident Evil games is that Capcom had always been intent on continuing the success of the franchise in the handheld market. The best example most fans are aware of is Resident Evil Gaiden, that was actually developed after a cancelled prototype of recreating the original game for Game Boy Color. Now eventually it would get a proper port on the DS, but what I find more interesting is the quote-unquote Demakes the first and second games got, especially since they've appeared to be left completely forgotten. The first game, titled Resident Evil Genesis, is a retelling of the mansion incident as you play from Jill's perspective. Barry and Wesker make up the only other STARS members, with Chris completely absent from the story, and not even getting mentioned at all. Barry immediately breaks the fourth wall by reading out the entire control scheme for a game that uses two buttons, one to open the inventory and the other that does everything else. Don't just stand there being useless. Okay Wesker, I get it, that's your job, right? So already in the first hall there's an extra 20 handgun bullets and like 3 key items. I know in Resident Evil terms that doesn't sound like a lot of ammo, but this game isn't really much of a survival horror since all enemies can be killed in a single shot, provided you use the right weapon. Whenever you enter a room with enemies, Jill goes into a combat mode with her gun equipped. Once you get into the line of fire, you press the action button to go into an aiming mode, with the sidebar slowly leading up to their weak point, and after it gets to the red, press the button again to kill them instantly. Back in the PS1 days, 20 bullets would have killed like 2 or 3 zombies max, but in this game it kills, well, 20. The game is stripped of a lot of core Resident Evil mechanics, and it's especially an issue given the game it's supposed to be based off. You have unlimited space in your inventory, so you never have to consider how much things you're picking up, or plan trips between safe rooms since there's none of those either. That means there's no typewriters for saving, which to be fair makes sense, given it's a mobile game that most people will play on and off during their free time. Saving can be done at any point by simply pausing the game, and while it makes sense, it leads to enemy encounters having completely zero tension. I realize I've been quite negative so far, but there is a lot of things this game gets right that's fairly impressive given the limitations. It's not pretty common for a mobile Java game to have much audio outside of in-game sound effects, but Genesis has at least 4 different types of background music, including the fan favourite More Rooms track, which plays at the main menu. Another notable point is that pretty much all the weapons from Resi 1 are here, including Chris's flamethrower. Each weapon has its own strengths for different enemies, like the shotgun for taking down Crimson Heads and the Magnum for the hunters. There's also an interesting little segment where you get chased by Lisa Trevor all Nemesis style. Funnily enough, this is only one of her 2 appearances in the game. The second time she shows up is during a cutscene where Barry reveals he has been secretly working for Wesker just before Lisa comes out of nowhere and brutally executes him. Jill doesn't even try to help him, and the only thing I can do is just leave the room. By the way, this happens like 30 minutes into the game, with my entire playthrough clocking in at just over an hour. That means quite a lot of segments got cut, like the outside areas and the guardhouse. In fact, the mansion itself has a completely different layout with only 2 floors, and it's small enough to where you don't even get a map. There are some recognizable things from the main game, like playing the piano, dealing with Plant 42, and electrocuting sharks. But again, everything's been condensed into like a 1-hour game. The only 2 puzzles in the mansion are the exact same thing, where you place different colored objects in the right places. Between the weapons, key items, and notes you're picking up, the inventory starts to get overly cluttered and becomes a bit of a hassle to dig through towards the end. After picking up the grenade launcher and the final key card, we get to the final room and confront Wesker. The Tyrant fight is a simple case of keeping your distance, and with the absolute stockpile of weapons and ammo Jill has, it's a piece of cake. Once he's dead, the mansion starts to explode and the game suddenly cuts to a wall of text, which strangely ends with a cliffhanger about a creature with cat-like eyes that survived the explosion. Okay, the second game, called Resident Evil Uprising, released a couple years later and is based on RE2 in case you couldn't guess. Already you can tell from the graphics there's been a huge jump in quality, along with the game running at a higher resolution and the switch to touchscreen controls. You can either use the on-screen buttons for movement and picking up items, or simply touch and hold on the screen the direction you want to go in, as well as tap on items to pick them up. All key items are highlighted with this glittery effect, so there's less chance you'll miss anything important on your first go around into a new room. The game surprisingly goes for a Resident Evil 0 style approach, with both characters you can switch between and share items with. At the same time though, it doesn't really reach the same impact, because unlike in that game, here you can carry as many items as you want. There's no need to juggle them between characters, and if anything it's kind of pointless because I can just carry all items as Claire. Really, it's only useful having the second character to clear out rooms of enemies if you're trying to preserve your health. I don't know, maybe there is character specific events later on in the game, but I just couldn't get far enough. It seems that this game doesn't work too well on emulators because it always ends up freezing within minutes of playing. Switching to Leon also froze the game pretty much instantly, and the one time it didn't, the entire emulator crashed shortly after instead. I tried turning off sound and messing around with some settings, but it wouldn't change anything, and at one point made things worse. Literally every recording I have ends with the game freezing, these clips only ranging from 30 seconds to 5 minutes. From what I've seen, this game appears to be slightly longer than the first one, coming in between 2 to 3 hours. But again, this is just the same story from RE2 shortened down dramatically, as you already start in the police building and see Sherry for the first time in the next room. I did find one cool little Easter egg with a suspicious note on someone's desk. I like to think this is the first time Leon's heard of Jill after reading this note on how to make a Jill sandwich. But yeah, despite its graphical improvements, the game mechanics are identical to Genesis, and while I didn't get to finish this one, I feel like it wouldn't be anything special. I hope. If you ever got the chance to play these games back in the day, then please feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these. And with that being said, thanks for watching. Bye guys.